Thank you very much. Let me again welcome you to Maison African Motives. We are still on Economic and Management Science Grade 7, EMS Grade 7. So we are on Term 3 notes. So in this presentation, we are going to do entrepreneurial actions of buying and selling. Entrepreneurial actions of buying and selling. This is what we are going to look at. So without wasting much time, let us get to the business of today. As it says, what is the difference between buying and selling? So the difference between buying and selling is that buying is obtaining goods. We are saying buying is obtaining goods, services, equipment, or raw materials, needed for a business. Needed for a business. So that is what? That is buy. For example, you find that Paul buys a meal from Macro. So that's buying. She's obtaining those goods. She's obtaining that meal from Macro. So that is that. But selling now, as we have just talked about buying, now let us come to selling. Let us come to selling. Selling. Selling is offering of goods or service to customers. Is offering of goods or services to customers in exchange of money. In exchange of money. So that is what you call buy. That's what you call, or that's what we call selling. So that's all about what? Selling. So meaning to say, for example, we can say now, Mpo sells the meal to people in her community. She's now selling. She's now offering the meal to people in community. But she first bought it from Macro. That was buying now. So hope we understand that. So let us move on with people, and then we move on to where we are asked to explain the following to learners. So we are asked to explain the following to learners. So these are entrepreneurial actions. So these are entrepreneurial actions. We call them entrepreneurial actions. So this is what we are asked to explain to learners. As it says, entrepreneurs take certain actions in order to create a successful business. So we are saying entrepreneurs must buy. That is the action that they are doing. They must buy or sell, plan, produce, and manage resources to make their business successful. That's what they are doing. That's the action that they have to take. As we are saying, entrepreneurs take certain actions in order to create successful business. So for them to take the actions that they are to take is to make sure that they are going to buy, they are going to sell, they are going to plan, they are going to produce, they are going to manage resources. That is the only way that they can be successful. So it does not matter what kind of business it is. It doesn't matter what kind of business it is, as long as entrepreneur, they take action. So a business can only be successful if it brings in more money that it spends in other ways. It must make profit. In other words, it must make a a profit. So we are saying a business must make what? Profit. A business must what? A business must make a profit. That is that. So meaning to say, a business is successful when it earns more money than it spends. Get me straight. We are saying a business is successful when it earns more money than it spends. That is that. A business, let me write it. Business is successful when it earns more money. When it earns more money, when it earns more money than it spends. More money than it spends. So that's what that statement means. For example, if a shop earns 5,000 and it spends 3,500, it makes profit of 1,500. That's what is needed. So hope we are together with people. And also is what do entrepreneurs do to achieve this? So for them to achieve this, what are they supposed to do? So that is that. It takes us back where we are saying they have to plan, they have to spend so that they can make a profit as well. Today we are going to look at buying and selling. This is what you're going to look, buying and selling. Tomorrow we're going to look at producing and making profit. So that is that. So now let us be on buying, like we have said, we are going to look in on or at buying. Today we are going to be on buying and selling. So it says the first basic function that the entrepreneur has to perform is buying or purchasing equipment, raw materials, and stock. That is the first basic function that they have to do. You first have to buy as an entrepreneur. You first have to buy equipments, raw materials, stock that is needed in the business. So that is what you're saying. So entrepreneurs buy equipments needed to operate what? The business. A bakery buys ovens, he buys mixers, he buys baking trays for the business to run. So that is that. So it says different business need different kinds of equipment to run the business. Like I've already said that that's going to be if you are going to bake, if you are in the bakery business, you're going to buy the ovens, you're going to buy mixers, you're going to buy baking trays, and all of those things. For example, a business might need furniture, computer, equipment, machinery, or vehicles. So this equipment is called capital items. So now we're talking about what? Capital items in short. So equipment such as furniture, computers, machinery, vehicles are called what? Capital items. So that is that. So it means the business needs what? It needs those capital items to run smoothly, to run successfully. So hope we're together. So also it further on says the entrepreneur needs to decide what equipment is needed, where it will be purchased. When buying the equipment, the entrepreneur negotiates. The entrepreneur negotiates what? The price with the supplier. Here we are talking about what? Negotiating prices. We're talking about what? Negotiating prices. So that is where the entrepreneurs often discuss prices with suppliers to get best deal. For example, a shop owner asks supplier for discount when buying large quantities of stock. So that is that. Also, it says raw materials are things that are used to make other goods. So they are the inputs in the production process. For example, examples of raw materials used in business that makes furniture include wood, nails, glue, fabric, and lead. All these are raw materials needed to be purchased. So now we're talking about what? Raw materials, buying of raw materials. Raw materials are materials used to make other products. Like talk of wood, nails, glue are raw materials used to make what? Furniture. So that is that. So it further on says the entrepreneur decide what raw materials will be needed and how much. of the raw materials to be purchased. So finding a reliable supplier who can provide good quality raw materials is very important for running a successful business. So here we are talking about choosing a good supplier. We're talking about what? Choosing a good supplier. Choosing a good supplier. So that's that. So entrepreneurs need reliable suppliers who provide quality goods at a reasonable prices. For example, a clothing manufacturer buys a fabric from a trusted supplier who delivers on time. That's what we want. So for buying finished goods, let us take an example of drug shop. A business that acts as a middleman between the producer and goods and the consumers that want to buy that things is called a retail business. It's called a retail business. So a tuck shop is a retail business. Or we're talking about what? A tuck shop. That is a tuck shop. So here we're talking about why buying finished goods. Buying of finished goods. So like they are saying, buying of finished goods, like they are saying retail business buy completed products and resell them to consumers. That is that. That is buying of what? Of finished goods. Buying of finished goods. It simple says retail business. We are saying business, retail business buy completed products. Buy completed products, buy completed um products and resell them to consumers. And resell them to consumers. So that's that. So, for example, a tech shop buys chips and sweets and cold drinks and then sells them to customers. So that is what you're saying. That is a retail business. They buy and resell. So that is that. So the retail business will get its discount from bulk wholesaler like macro, where the prices is lower than local supermarket. So here we're talking about the retail business. So retail business acts as a middleman between producer and wholesaler as well as consumers. So that is that. You can talk of Lerato's tech shop buys products from macro and sell them to community members. So that's what we are trying to say. So they buy from wholesalers, meaning to say retailers often buy from wholesalers because prices are lower. They buy from wholesalers because prices are low. So that is that. So now we can come to selling. We can come to selling. As it is, entrepreneurs start business to supply unmet need. Unmet what? Needs. So that is that. So as we are on selling as is, entrepreneurs start business to supply unmet needs. So the entrepreneurs start business to make sure that they are going to respond to the needs of the customers. So they start business to make sure that they're going to satisfy the needs of what? Of the customers. So they are trying by almost to bridge the gap. So that's what entrepreneurs are. Or that's the reason behind why they start the business. They want to supply those unmet needs. So as it says, selling is the action of persuading customers to buy a product or service. So it means that selling is convincing customers to buy a product or service. So once it talks about persuading, so it simple says selling uh, selling is convincing is convincing customers to buy product or service. To buy product or service. So that's what it means. For example, a salesperson explains why a particular washing powder is effective. So once he or she explains that, it means he wants to persuade. He wants to persuade the customer to buy. He wants to convince these customers to buy that product, that washing powder. So hope we are together with people. And also it says selling involves talking. Selling involves talking to customers and explaining to them how product works and telling customers about the benefits of a product. Meaning to say, you explain product benefits. It's about what? Explaining product benefits. Many entrepreneurs tell customers how products work and how they can help them. How products work, the product uses, and how it's going to help what? The customer. That is that. For example, a cell phone shop assistants explain the features of a new smartphone. That's what we are trying to say, good people. Let us move on. Grade 7, let us move on. So now we come to entrepreneurial actions. We come to entrepreneurial actions. That's where we are. That's where we are now. For entrepreneurial actions, as we are given one example, as it says, Grace started her own tech shop, which is called Grace Tech Shop, in her community to meet their demands for goods that they would otherwise have to buy from business situated far from Tembisa. So she buys most of her stock from Macro in Johannesburg. So that is that. Meaning to say, Grace purchases products from Macro and brings them to her community. So she buys from Macro in Johannesburg and brings those brings that stock to her community. That's what it means. Because we are even told that uh, this, we're told that the business, otherwise they were going to buy from Johannesburg, Tembisa, which is far from Tembisa. They were going to buy from Johannesburg, and this Johannesburg is far from Tembisa where they are staying. So this is what it means, as it says, in her community to meet their demands for goods that they would otherwise have to buy from business situated far from Tembisa. So if it was not because of grace, they were going to buy far from Tembisa. So grace brought those goods closer to customers. That's how she met what the demands for goods, for those for that goods. So it says buying. When an entrepreneur starts a business, he or she must buy the goods from somewhere to sell it in their communities. That's what Grace did. In the above example, we notice that Grace business owner buys her goods from Macro. That is true. Macro in Johannesburg. She will bring the goods to her premises, which is close to her community, to sell. Because we are told that if it wasn't because of grace, they were going to buy from far, 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 far from Tembisa. So, but grace brought them, brought those goods closer to them. So, example of goods that she will buy include sugar, meal, flour, canned food, cold drinks, household items, washing powder, bleach, snacks, and like sweets, chips, and etc. So that is that. So now let us be on selling. Let us be on selling. Let us be on selling. Selling says Grace sell goods to people in her community to satisfy their needs. Other entrepreneurs may start business to provide a service to the community. Examples are dry cleaning, internet, transport, as well as photographic services. So that is that. So, meaning to say we're talking about selling. So Grace sells these products to community members to satisfy their needs. Because now a customer can buy a loaf of bread as well as cold drink from Grace's shop. Rather than going far, far. So selling services, like now we're told about selling services, like some entrepreneurs provide services instead of products. We were told that the service that they are providing is cleaning, internet, transport, photographic services. So that is that. So now let us go to producing. Producing. So we are on producing. What is a production? What is a production before we can even talk about producing? So when we talk of production, production is the process of changing raw materials into finished goods or services. So it means it forces us to talk about what? Production. And when you talk of production, you're talking about what? Is the process that you're talking about, the process of changing, sorry, so of changing raw materials, raw materials into finished goods, into finished goods or services, So for example, fabric is turned into dresses. So that is what we mean when you talk of what? Of production. So as you say, the production is the process. So now we can say, we can come to the statement, the changing of raw materials into goods or services, they can satisfy needs and wants. They can satisfy needs and wants. So it is a series of steps that starts with inputs, that's raw material and labor, and goes through the process of manufacturing, yielding the end product and outputs. So like we are saying, uh, the as we are saying, it starts with what? Inputs. As it says, it is series steps. It is a series of steps that starts with what? With inputs. So we need to say inputs are resources turned in production, such as raw materials and labor. That is that. You can talk of fabric, you can talk of freight, you can talk of workers, are inputs for making clothes. So that is that. So when you talk of outputs, as it says, and it goes through a process of manufacturing, yielding the end product and outputs. Outputs are finished products. Are finished products produced, like a completed dress is an output. So if Grace's neighbor buys material from supplier to make clothes, she uses material input using sewing machines, and then come to production process to make dress and output, which is the end product. So that is that. Now we come to making a profit. Making a profit. As it says, if Grace buys goods from Macro, then she need to sell at the higher price to be able to make what? Profit. So the amount of money left in a business after all expenses have been paid from sales generated is what? Profit. So this is the formula now. This is the formula to calculate what? A profit. So profit is equal to selling price minus cost price. So for example, Grace buys a bag of milk from Macro at 40 Rand. At 40 Rand, that is a cost price. And she sells it at 55 Rand. That is a selling price. In her community, to enable her to make profit. So we're going to say selling price minus cost price is equal to profit. 55 is our SP, selling price, minus CP, cost price, and then it gives us what? A profit. Now it gives us what? A profit of how much? Of 15 Rand. That is that. Thank you very much for your time, and please make sure that you share with others. Thank you.